I'm Daniel Bass, manager of the South Asia program at Cornell University.
And I'm Shavin Senavaratna, graduate student in architecture at Cornell and student worker at the South Asia program. Welcome back to Season 2 of the Next Monsoon podcast, where we'll be featuring interviews recorded during the conference alongside some snippets of conference presentations. Our first guest is Nayanika Mathur, one of the panelists at the conference. Nayanika is a professor of anthropology and South Asian studies at the University of Oxford. She shared with us her excitement about the range of conversations and disciplinary research at the conference.
Hi, I'm Nayanika Mathur. I'm an anthropologist working in the Indian Himalaya. I'm based in the United Kingdom.
Welcome to the Next Monsoon podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
So what have been some takeaways of the conference so far?
I think the most exciting takeaway from the conference so far has been the mix of methods. I've been particularly excited to see how architects are speaking to art historians, who are speaking to media studies people, who are in conversation with anthropologists and historians. And actually, for once, people are actually in conversation with one another, because you can often have these interdisciplinary conferences and you're sort of speaking past one another. But I think so far, we're in the middle of day 2 now, and I've been really fascinated by how we've been actually able to set up a productive conversation with one another.
That's good to hear, because that was the intention of the organizers, but you never know until
the day
it comes.
What was one presentation that you found interesting and caught your attention?
So I think I would say there were 2 that I found particularly striking and which I've been thinking a lot about. The first one was Emily's presentation on the first day in Mustang, and today actually Mabel's presentation on indigenous geopolitics in Sikkim. And we often come to other people's work through our own work and our own experiences. And, which is perhaps a bit selfish, but I think this is also how academics work. Yeah. And I thought both the papers were terrific, but what I actually found really fascinating was that one was in Nepal, one is in Sikkim, and I work in the state called Uttarakhand in India. And there are such similar narratives, similar accounts that we're seeing across these spaces. And it felt like I could so relate to everything they were saying. It's like I've heard people say the same things. Even the visuals were so striking. Some of the politics around infrastructure, for instance, or about state forms, or about questions of migration were very similar. But at the same time, Emily and Mabel were also doing something different with with the paper. And I think what was different was the geopolitics in a way of it. Yeah. One is in Nepal, and the other is in Sikkim, and they have a very different sort of history and geopolitics to it from where I work. So I found that difference quite interesting. I think also they come from different disciplinary backgrounds, perhaps, from me. So they're more inclined towards geography, and I think Emily's earlier work was in Tibet. And so I found that also really interesting as an ethnographer, as an anthropologist, and how do we talk ethnographically, empirically across spaces that seem similar but actually are different.
Nayanika mentioned Emily A's presentation, which we featured earlier this season in episode 3, and Mabel Gergen's, which was in episode 4.
We now share Lalitha Gopalan's presentation, Reckonings and Speculations in Moving Image Practices. Lalitha is an associate professor in the Department of Radio, Television, Film at the University of Texas at Austin.
Here is Lalitha Gopalan.
I hope some of you do recognize the film. It's Mani Ratnam's Nayanika, and it is set in Bombay. Mani Ratnam's most blatant attempt to regulate the anachrony of these sequences while retaining the splendor of the spectacle occurs in the Andamaya Megam rain cloud segment celebrating the spring festival Holi. Dousing them with colored waters, revelers ambush Velu, who's the protagonist over here, played by Kamala Hassan, in the center of the neighborhood, which is in Dharavi, set in Dharavi. The center where statesmen were measuring land, where Velu killed the inspector, and so on. So this is quite a central piece of action. Remember, it's a space of action, not the place. This sequence recalls a holy sequence from Ramesh Sippy's Sholay of 1975, where the celebration of spring works as a buffer for the prospect of violence. By setting the sequence against the backdrop of monsoon rains, Mani Ratnam alters a seasonal and festival calendar in such a way that the very distinct moments of Holi in March and the monsoon rains in June are fused together. In terms of conventions, this reordering of two different calendars offers an ingenious method to deal simultaneously with conventions of rain and festival songs that have great currency in popular cinema. However, we must consider how Mani Ratnam's preoccupation with narrative verisimilitude rests on delivering an improved and altered reality to his viewers. I mean, this is kind of quite ingenious, okay? So that's sort of the setup. These were my interests at that point in trying to sort of map, as it were, my own investment in this notion of ecology at that point. This is 2002. The third section is called Reigns and Theories of Practice. Avoiding and quoting elements brings out the anecdotal in FTI cinematographers, for whom chance and accident, both forms of contingency, narrate their practice in hindsight. Shashikant Anantachari directs me to Satyajit Ray's narrative of shooting Kanchenjunga in 1962 in Darjeeling. Subrata Mathur, the legendary cinematographer, would wait for the mist and fog to roll onto their set while rolling his own camera to deliver an intriguing narrative. Not far from here, also in Darjeeling, Fali Mistry, the cinematographer shooting in Hindi commercial film Ek Muzaffar, Ek Hasina, made in 1962, would wait for the fog to burn before shooting his film stars in the clear light of day. From his own practice of shooting the elements, Anantachari narrates an assignment that was beset with accidents. He was a cinematographer on Rahat Yusufi's Pratikriya, made in 1990, a project commissioned by the films division that was set in the drought blight of Kalanadi district of Orissa. Anantachari had forewarned Yusufi that rains chased him at every shoot, and there was a good possibility that this may not be a drought film after all. Dismissing his cinematographer's superstition, Yusufi launched his shoot, and on the first day, the dry, cracked landscape open to the baking sun was soon covered by clouds and hit by rain. Rain showers persisted, despite the residents assuring that it was most unusual. It was a time of analog, and the sound recordist was close at hand for the entire shoot. Anantachari says that you can hear the pounding rain on the soundtrack of a drought film, since at that time, even the best of sound equalizers could not tame such ambient recordings, a claim that did not dim the prestige of winning the 38th National Award for the Best Environment Film. So this is kind of the ways in which theories of practice work. The credit for actively quoting rains also belongs to Shaji Kuran's Piravi, made in 1989, shot by the aptly named cinematographer Sonny Joseph. At this shoot, Joseph would wait for the full force of monsoon showers to capture glistening wet surfaces and surging rivers for a film also about waiting. This anecdote arrived from K. Monan, who had his own share of adventures with rains while shooting a short fiction film, Kannada film, part of the anthology Aidu, which is sort of like really bad pronunciation by me, in 2011 in Madikeri, Coorg, and based on a short story. The director wanted the shoot to begin in December, the dry season, and decided to hire rain machines to replicate the monsoon ambience. Mohanan, who had started off as a documentary filmmaker, decided against the artificial studio device and asked for a schedule during the monsoons. The 4-day shoot in July was more than he had bargained for. Quote, it was raining cats and dogs. Temperatures had dropped and the set of a thatched hut was flooded. Mohanan recalls wading at waist-high waters to shoot the actors, whose chattering teeth added a naturalism to the shots of shadows and silhouettes offered by monsoon light that no rain machine can deliver. It is a narrative about a deadbeat husband and a hardworking wife, a short film exploring the duration of labor as gender temporality. So part of this is also in response to some of our questions, which I was kind of asking, which is about the notion of the ways in which we do fieldwork or visit sites in the dry season, though we are writing about rain. The fourth section is called Cinemas of Dust, Leeward Cinema. Okay, I know you're all in the monsoon space, but I also work on the other side, where there's no rain, okay? In contrast to searching for rains and forests, contemporary independent Tamil cinema embraces the leeward location as its preferred mise-en-scène. Kumar Raja's Nayanika, 2010, offers one such setting. Dust from the rubble and landscape and landfills texture this film, giving shape to forms in the dark interiors of bedrooms, in the dreary room of drunken brawls at a lodge, and in the red filters of torture rooms. Dust clings to clothes and sweaty bodies in fight sequences, literally dust-ups. Quote, "I love sweat and dirt," declares Tyagaraja Kumar Raja, the director of the film, unconsciously echoing the aesthetics of a neo-noir whose lighting arrangement benefits greatly from this very dust blowing into shapes. Film shooting sites in the global south have differing relationships to dust. For instance, filmmaker Juan Pablo notes how in Mexico, advertisement shoots were obsessed with generating dust to provide a hazy look in the age of analog. In contrast, Swarnavel Pillai recalls cinematographer Madhu Ambat, who works between Chennai and Kerala, insisting on dust-free lenses for his shoots. Strangely, in contrast to his style of overexposed images, this is kind of, Madhu Ambat's films are known for being overexposed, but he wanted sort of dust-free lenses. So, dust blows across continents, according to Timothy Beach, geographer of dust. And here, too, the presence of such dust and sweat places this film, which is Aranyankandam, in close proximity to dust blowing from all of Park Won-chok's films and Nicholas Winding Refn's, to neo-noirs that share a complicity in their common commitment to nihilism. Okay, so there is a section on dust blowing and archives, but I'm going to leave that, okay? I can't tell what I'm making in terms of time, but I sort of want to also show you a clip later on. 5. It's called Elements, Medium Specificity. Okay, in an essay that I written called The Enchanted Worlds of FTR Diploma Films, written in 2017, I note a rise in the mise-en-scène as a dispositif, a conceptualization inspired by Scott McDonald, who's from these parts, a neologism coined by him called eco-cinema, and Adrian Martin's return to the mise-en-scène across art cinema. This is kind of crucial for us in film studies. This was a real turn that had happened. The archive of FTI diploma films presents a challenge in terms of both the volume of films produced, which is about 12 a year, if you're lucky, and the levels of unorthodoxy to which they aspire. I argue here that the subject of the environment has exerted a particular presence in the catalog of diploma films from 2013 onwards. Not before then, but since 13. Far flung from each other in terms of form, such films nevertheless form a distinct group in their sustained attention to the extent that we can consider them ideal texts in the growing scholarship on the relationship between cinema and ecology. These films startle us with their audacity to imagine worlds in which protagonism is not the exclusive purview of humans, but rather a shared perspective that forgoes opposition in favor of entwinement. These films captivate and enchant, luring us to enter worlds beyond critique and polemic. Aman Vadan's Letter to Korlai, made in 2015, echoes Chris Marker's Letter from Siberia, made in 1957. The decades that separate them amplify differences in the epistolary gesture and the shortening of length. Yet, Chris Marker's is not 20 minutes long, yet both rehearse the conventions of the canonical essay film. The reversal is no small matter in Vadan's film. It eschews Marker's addressee at large in favor of a specific one, Korlai, a town on the Konkan coast of India. The notion of whether Korlai receives the letter or not is forever postponed, since our viewing performs an interception that plunges directly into the film's preoccupation with the shape of a form of contingency that is inflected by accidents from production to finale. As the images unroll loosely from beach to ritual, from horse to obelisk, the rationale of sequencing seems inconsequential. Rather, we're mesmerized by the images qua images. bleached out beaches, the glint of a horse's tail, grainy surfaces, and bleeding colors. We are in the thrall of celluloid deteriorating, its patina worn out with scratched surfaces and frayed edges. That these are images blown up from 16mm film stock is obvious from their grainy veneer. With an avowed affection for the 16mm camera, the standby for every incoming class for decades at FDI, Vedant reclaims and reanimates the apparatus, quote him, with its much-abused chromatically deviant zoom lenses. He goes on, accumulation of debris on the metallic edge of the film gate, close quotes. The effects of aging and institutional neglect are thus presented as an advantage rather than a shortcoming, where the Fuji Eterna Vivid 500T from the color portions of the Kodak XX 250D for the black and white, his response to Annual 12 to 120mm zoom lens is one of adoration. I have to give up all my geekiness. So let me move to the fifth section. Swarnavel's film, Katamaram, made in 2018. Set in a coastal village in Kanyakumari district, Pillai's Katamaram unfolds its narrative in a time after the tsunami that rode through the Indian Ocean on December 26, 2004. A plot summary focused on the lives of the human protagonists reveals a shift away from normative affinities and tending towards queer bonds. My own interest in the film lies in the film's investment in mounting a mise-en-scène, which has the camera trained on the vast stretches of the sea. I shall be brief here, but want to offer that along with the works by other Tamil directors like Ram and Vetrimaran, Pillai's film signifies the picturization of seascapes as a mise-en-scène of longing, a conceptualization that wages on a turn towards Sangam poetics. In their philosophy of cinema, Pillai summons Nethal Thinnai, landscape, that is, the landscape on the sea facing, to stage the space of action as one brimming with longing and hope, unfastened by the tsunami. So this for me is important. It doesn't make the tsunami a catastrophic condition. We're actually back at the sea, and there's a longer sort of version over here, which is also a rewriting of what has been known in Tamil cinema scholarship as nativity films, which are all set in these beautiful paddy fields of Tamil Nadu, and this is not in that space at all. So thank you very much. In media res, as it were. Yes, thank you.
That was Lalita Gopalan presenting her paper Reckonings and Speculations in Moving Image Practices at the conference. And she began her paper discussing Nayanika, which means hero, which is probably my favorite Tamil film and possibly my favorite Indian film of all time. And it's like an Indian version of The Godfather, in which this gangster, played by Kamal Hassan, rises in the ranks, losing the ones he loves.
She also featured other films in her talk, but I guess the way that she was trying to emphasize was the South Asian way of filmmaking and cinematography had this very intricate relationship with nature, where they try to incorporate the power of nature as in its texture of how rain is flooding down, or even how dust is represented to create this ambient lighting and visual. So it's it's a rich visual and audio effect that comes out.
Yeah, no, definitely the monsoon is a backdrop for so much of filmmaking in South Asia. And, with the dust and how it forms rubbles and affects lighting, and also just the filmmaking experience itself. But interestingly, at the end she talks about Thinnai, which is this classical Tamil sense of landscape. And it goes back to the Sangam age of like centuries BCE, but it was this used in poetry to talk about there were different landscapes and different spaces had different poetry associated with it and different emotions and different sensibilities, and kind of tying in that there's been a long-standing, for many centuries, a sense in South Asia where certain spaces and art and literature and expression are all integrated together.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's it for today's episode of The Next Monsoon. Next time, on our final episode, we'll be hearing a collective view from our guests this season on their hopes after the Next Monsoon conference this past October.
We would like to give special thanks to Sam Lubowitz and Angelica Kramer at Cornell's Language Resource Center for their assistance with recording this podcast. Shavin Senavaratna not only co-hosts this podcast, but is also our editor. South Asia Program Administrator Gloria Lemus Chavez provided production supervision. Funding for this podcast and the entire Next Monsoon project comes from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Please follow the South Asia program on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at SAP Cornell. You've been listening to music by Gloria Lemus-Chavez and her partner Brandon Kane. Make sure to check out more of their work in the description links below.
The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of the National Endowment for the Humanities, Cornell's Office of the Vice Provost for International Affairs, or any other official entity of Cornell University.
I'm Daniel Bass.
And I'm Shavin Senavaratna.
Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode for new conversations and stories on the next monsoon.